purpose of this short presentation is to summarise the topic we've been covering for the past couple of weeks of social media marketing, as we didn't get a chance in the lecture the other day to complete the final few slides. So I thought I'd check out Camtasia and just try this audio and PowerPoint combination to just give you the final overview before we move on to the guest session next week. So, in summary then, we talked about a number of ways in which businesses can engage with social media, and this slide summarises the benefits that have accrued to companies that are early adopters in this area. So it's partly to do with engagement and dialogue with key customers who are advocates for your brand and will encourage others to follow suit. Customer service is a really big issue that we're just at the tip of the iceberg of, but some companies, mobile phone companies like O2 for example, are using Twitter to address customer service queries, complaints in real time and push the queries through to the right people. Certainly in terms of internal communication, it's a very effective way within a business for people to communicate regardless of their seniority or whereabouts in the organisation they may be. So cutting across silos and helping communication with senior management are two key aspects of this. Now, in terms of market research, social media is proving useful in terms of seeing what's new, what trends are coming up, and really positioning the company at the sharp end of new developments. Crowdsourcing of new product development, so that means getting feedback from customers on your ideas, or indeed actively seeking ideas from customers, for example for producing video ads. Things like that is a very cheap and relevant way of accessing research data. And finally, the way in which social networks enable companies to access expertise on a global basis in order to progress their new product development, for example, or to find business partners for a specific project, and generally have a much wider profile than has been possible in the past. So we've talked about a number of examples of early adopter companies that are making use of social media and accruing this type of benefit. But moving on to the next slide, not all of them are doing it. In fact, as we saw from that research data on American companies, the vast majority of businesses are not doing it. So why not is the question. So issues about traditional structures and traditional systems, and this is the way we do things around here, the sort of things that you may have covered if you've done an OB course, for example, are one possible example. Another is the way in which technology is treated within the organisation and the way in which permissions are required to effect change. Fears about confidentiality and giving away of trade secrets, lack of control of the message. We've talked about these issues. Companies still operating in a broadcast mode, so about one-way communications rather than interactivity. And generally being afraid to try something new on the basis that we're doing okay at the moment, so why should we risk making things worse? But what I think we're increasingly seeing is that companies that take this view and resist these new ways of engaging and interacting are going to be at a disadvantage compared with those that do. Okay, so another bit of research to inform you about, this time by McKinsey's, the consultancy company, instead of looking at fairly traditional organisations like the research we looked at in the lecture, this research specifically focused on early adopter companies, so companies who are ahead of the curve and have actively thrown themselves into social media. So it gives a very different perspective. However, even within these organisations, there were a number of issues that came out of the research which were restricting the effectiveness of Web2 investments. They're listed here: restrictive structures, resistance to change, using social media in traditional rather than interactive ways, and lack of support from senior people in the organisation. So these issues of resistance are not just with traditional organisations. Even the early adopters have struggled. So what do McKinsey's recommend in order to address these issues? Well, we looked, for example, at General Motors and how the chief exec was leading by example and blogging about his role and his day-to-day working life. So becoming a role model in this way can inspire and encourage people within the company to follow your example. Having a policy, I showed you the BBC blogging policy. So some sort of policy which makes it clear to employees what they can or can't do. So not in the sense of a set of orders which would be off-putting, but just really a helpful guide so that people who aren't sure can be clear: oh yes, I can blog about this, or no, I can't blog about that. These are the kind of parameters and boundaries that help to encourage people to get started. Appealing to desire for recognition. Well, by making blogging competitive, for example, think of the AVG example where a number of employees were starting to blog. If there was some sort of system where those blogs were showcased on the website and perhaps rated, and the comments were visible to other people looking down the list, so it was quite obvious perhaps which blog got the most readers, which had the highest rating, which had the most comments, then obviously there would be kudos to the writer of that blog. So making the process a competitive one could encourage people to take it seriously. And also identifying which employees are keen and are willing to try, and getting them to encourage others to follow their example and perhaps guide them through their first few posts can be a good way of getting people started who are perhaps less willing to try something new. And getting the issue of risk right is the final point on here. So yes, there's a risk involved. There's a risk involved in lots of things, but is it a reasonable level of risk, and not being too dictatorial about what is allowed. And also, I think, bearing in mind that because there is transparency of video, written materials, photos, it's very obvious who has posted what, who has said what, then it is quite effective self-policing in many cases, that if somebody is not quite on message or not doing things in the required style, then they can be guided and corrected on an ongoing basis.